The Millionaire CEO stood frozen in front of 300 people, staring at a chessboard like it had just delivered the worst news of his life. His mouth opened, then closed. Sweat gathered at his hairline under the studio lights. Across from him sat a 14-year-old boy in a second-hand jacket, silent and still, who had just done something that should have been impossible. 3 moves. That's all it took. The room erupted in gasps and whispers, phones lifting toward the board like witnesses to a car crash. But the boy didn't celebrate. He simply reached into his pocket and touched something no one else could see, something that mattered more than money, more than winning, more than the stunned faces surrounding him. This is the story of how that moment happened. And why what came after shook an entire town. But before we dive in, don't just watch, please hit the subscribe button. I'm still fighting my way to our first 1,000 subscribers, and every single click truly keeps this channel alive. And tell me in the comment where in the world you are watching from. Your support inspires us to keep creating more emotional stories of resilience, healing and kindness. Nico James lived in the kind of apartment where you learned not to expect much. The heat worked when it wanted to. The walls were thin enough to hear arguments 3 doors down. His mother, Denise, kept the place clean, but cleanliness couldn't hide worn carpet or the way the bathroom door stuck every single time. It was a Tuesday night when Nico sat at their small kitchen table under a lamp that flickered if you bumped it wrong. In front of him, a chessboard his grandfather had given him years ago, before everything changed. He wasn't playing against anyone. He was studying. His fingers moved across the pieces slowly, deliberately, like he was listening to something the board was trying to say. Knight to e5. Pause. Bishop blocks the diagonal. Pause. Queen sacrifices herself to open the king. Most kids his age were on their phones or gaming. Nico had tried both. The sounds were too sharp. The notifications felt like small electric shocks in his chest. He was autistic, though he hated when people said it like it explained everything about him. It didn't. What it did mean, certain things hit harder. Loud restaurants made him want to crawl out of his skin. Eye contact sometimes felt like staring into headlights. And people were exhausting because they said one thing and meant another, and Nico's brain couldn't stop trying to solve the gap. But chess was honest. Every piece did exactly what it said it would do. No hidden meanings. No sarcasm. Just clarity, consequence, and silence. His grandfather, Samuel James, had taught him that. Samuel had been a custodian at a high school in Newark for 30 years. He wasn't wealthy. Didn't have fancy degrees. But he knew chess the way some people know prayer. On cold winter nights when Denise worked double shifts at the diner off North Avenue, Samuel would set up the board and say the same thing every time. The board is noisy for people who rush. It gets quiet for people who see. Nico didn't fully understand it back then. He was 8, 9, 10 years old. But he felt it. Samuel taught him how to wait. How to see not just the move in front of him, but 3 moves ahead. 5 moves. 10. How to recognize when someone was trying to intimidate you with aggression that had no foundation. How to turn pressure into opportunity. And then, 2 years ago, Samuel died. Heart attack in his sleep. Gone before anyone could say goodbye. Nico stopped talking for 3 weeks after that. When he finally opened his mouth again, the first thing he asked his mother was if he could keep his grandfather's chess set. She said yes, of course. But there was one piece Samuel had carved himself, by hand, out of old wood from a broken chair. The king. It didn't match the other pieces. It was rough in places, smooth in others, burnished dark from years of Samuel's thumb rubbing across it while he thought. Nico kept it in his jacket pocket now, everywhere he went. It wasn't good luck. It was memory. It was proof that someone had believed in him when the rest of the world wasn't paying attention. Tonight, alone at the kitchen table, Nico whispered to the board like his grandfather might hear him. I see it now, he said softly. The quiet part. From the other room, he heard his mother's voice crack on the phone. She was talking to the landlord again. The rent was late. Again. Nico closed his eyes and gripped the wooden king in his pocket. He didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change. Saturday morning arrived cold and gray, the kind of weather that made Westfield, New Jersey feel like it was holding its breath. Denise didn't have to work until the evening shift, so she suggested they go into town. Get out of the apartment. Breathe air that didn't smell like old pipes and someone else's cooking. Nico agreed because his mother looked tired in a way that worried him. They walked past the coffee shops where people sat with laptops, past the boutiques with mannequins in clothes that cost more than their rent. Nico kept his hands in his pockets, the wooden king resting against his palm. Then they saw it. Brooks Innovations had taken over the entire plaza in front of their corporate headquarters. Banners hung from light poles, "Community Matters. Building Futures Together." A small stage had been set up. Cameras on tripods. People in suits shaking hands and smiling too wide for it to be real. It was a charity event. One of those things where rich people gave away scholarships and pretended the cameras weren't the whole point. Nico stopped walking. In the center of the plaza, behind a velvet rope, sat a chessboard. It was decorative, oversized, the pieces gleaming like they'd never been touched. The board wasn't there for playing. It was there to look impressive. But Nico saw it anyway. "You want to get closer?" Denise asked. He nodded. They moved through the crowd, or tried to. A security guard in a black jacket stepped in front of them, not aggressive, but firm. "Events for guests and donors," he said, glancing at Nico's worn sneakers and his mother's work jacket. Denise's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. She just took Nico's hand and guided him to the edge, where they could see without crossing the invisible line that separated people like them from people like them. Nico stared at the board. Someone next to him whispered. "Why's that kid just standing there?" Another voice, "Probably doesn't even know how to play." He heard it. He always heard it. But before he could process the sting, a voice cut through the crowd like a spotlight. "Hey, kid." Nico looked up. The man walking toward him was tall, maybe 40, with the kind of smile that made you feel like he was about to sell you something. His suit was perfect. His hair was perfect. Even his confidence looked tailored. Harris Brooks. CEO. Millionaire. The man whose name was on the building behind them. "You play?" Harris asked, nodding toward the chessboard. Nico's throat tightened. He managed a single nod. The crowd turned. Phones came out. People leaned in. Harris grinned wider. This was content. This was a moment. "All right then," Harris said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Let's make this interesting. There are moments in life where you walk into a room and instantly know you don't belong. Maybe it's the way people look at you. Maybe it's the silence that follows when you speak. Maybe it's just the weight of being seen and unseen at the same time. If you've ever felt that, if you've ever been the person standing on the wrong side of the velvet rope, then you already know what Nico felt in that moment. And if this story is hitting something real in you, something that makes you want to see how it ends, then stay. Because what happens next doesn't just change Nico's life. It changes the way an entire town sees power, promises, and the kids they overlooked. Harris gestured toward the board like a game show host. $3,000, he announced. You beat me, you walk out of here with a check today. You lose, he paused for effect. You help clean up when we're done here. Someone in the crowd laughed. Make it quick. 3 moves each. 3 moves. The suggestion hung in the air like a joke. Impossible. Ridiculous. Harris loved it. Nico looked at his mother. She looked back, worry flooding her eyes. She didn't know chess. She didn't know if this was fair. But she knew her son. She squeezed his hand once. Nico reached into his pocket and touched the wooden king. He closed his eyes for just a second, and in his mind, he heard his grandfather's voice. See the quiet part. He opened his eyes. Okay, Nico said softly. The crowd pressed in. Cameras angled. Harris sat down across from him, still smiling. And for the first time all day, the plaza went completely silent. The chessboard sat between them like a stage neither had asked for but both understood. Harris Brooks adjusted his watch, a Rolex that caught the winter sun and threw light across the pieces. Nico simply sat, hands folded in his lap, eyes tracing the board like he was reading a language only he could speak. Around them, the crowd thickened. Someone counted heads, over 200 people now. Phones raised. A local news crew repositioned their camera for a better angle. Harris leaned back in his chair, relaxed, playing to the audience. You know the rules, right? He said, voice carrying. 3 moves. That's it. Whoever has the better position wins. But honestly, kid, if you get me in real trouble, I'll be impressed. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Light, polite, the kind that agreed with power because it was easier than questioning it. Nico said nothing. Denise stood just beyond the velvet rope now, arms crossed, watching her son with the kind of vigilance that mothers develop when the world has made them cautious. She didn't know what 3 moves meant in chess. She didn't know if this man was playing fair or setting her boy up for humiliation. But she knew Nico. And when he got quiet like this, when his face smoothed into that distant focus, something was happening beneath the surface. A woman next to her whispered to her friend. This is cruel. That kid looks terrified. But Nico wasn't terrified. He was calculating. Harris made the first move without hesitation. Pawn to e4. Standard. Confident. The kind of opening that said I've done this 1,000 times. The crowd murmured approval. Nico's hand hovered over his pieces for only a second. Then he moved. Pawn to e5. Mirror response. Classical. Clean. Harris smiled and nodded, like a teacher pleased with a student's correct answer. Not bad. He moved again. Knight to f3. Developing, controlling the center, building pressure. Textbook. Nico responded instantly. Knight to c6. Harris paused. Just for a moment. His smile stayed, but something flickered behind his eyes. The kid wasn't guessing. He was responding with intention. The crowd sensed the shift too. The laughter died down. People leaned closer. Last move, someone said from the back. Harris stared at the board longer this time. He had to make this count. Had to show dominance. This was his event, his plaza, his moment. He couldn't let a kid in a second-hand jacket make him look weak in front of cameras. He moved his bishop to c4. Aggressive. Aimed directly at Nico's weakest point, the f7 square. A classic attack. The kind of move that intimidated beginners. The crowd reacted. Ooh. There it is. Game over. Harris sat back, satisfied. He'd set a trap. Now he just had to wait for the kid to walk into it. Nico looked at the board. Then he looked at Harris. Their eyes met for the first time. And Nico smiled. It wasn't a big smile. Barely visible. But it was there. A crack in the stillness. Harris's confidence wavered. Nico reached out, fingers steady, and moved his queen. Queen to f6. The plaza went silent. Not the polite silence of an audience waiting for the next line. The stunned silence of people realizing they just watched something they didn't understand but couldn't ignore. One man in the crowd, an older guy with glasses, gasped audibly. Wait. No. He just. Harris stared at the board. His smile was gone. He leaned forward, studying the position, tracing lines, calculating futures. And then he saw it. If he moved his knight, the queen took his bishop. If he defended the bishop, the knight forked his king and rook. If he castled, he walked into a discovered check that collapsed his entire position. Every option led to loss. Every path was a trap he'd built for himself. 3 moves, and the game was over. Harris's face went pale. Sweat beaded at his temple. He looked up at Nico, then at the crowd, then back at the board like it might offer him an escape it had already refused to give. Someone's phone clattered to the pavement. A woman whispered, "Did that just happen?" Nico sat perfectly still, hand resting on the edge of the table. Then, slowly, he reached into his pocket and touched the wooden king. He didn't gloat. Didn't celebrate. Didn't say a word. He just waited. For 5 seconds, nobody moved. Harris Brooke sat frozen, staring at the board like it had betrayed him. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. The crowd pressed closer, sensing something monumental had just occurred but unable to name it. Then the whispers started. Is it over? Can that be right? Someone checked the position. The older man with glasses pushed through to the front. He was a regular at the town's chess club, had been playing for 40 years. He looked at the board, blinked, looked again. Checkmate in 1, he said quietly. Then louder, the kid has forced checkmate in 1 move. There's no way out. The crowd exploded. Phones lit up like fireflies. Gasps turned into exclamations. Someone started clapping, then stopped when they realized no one else had joined. The news crew pushed forward, the cameraman zooming in on the board, trying to capture what had just been proven. Harris's hand trembled slightly as he reached toward his king. For a moment, it looked like he might tip it over, the universal gesture of resignation, the acknowledgement of defeat. But he didn't. His hand hovered, then pulled back. Nico watched him. Not with triumph. Not with judgment. Just watched, like he was waiting for something he already knew was coming. Denise covered her mouth with both hands. $3,000. $3,000 would mean rent paid for months. It would mean heat that stayed on. It would mean she could stop choosing between groceries and electricity. She felt tears burn behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not until the check was in Nico's hand. Harris stood abruptly. His chair scraped against concrete, the sound cutting through the noise like a blade. He forced a laugh. Too loud. Too sharp. That was good, he said, voice projecting across the plaza. Really good. I mean, wow. Didn't expect that. The crowd settled slightly, waiting. But you know, Harris gestured vaguely at the board. This was an exhibition. Just for fun. Entertainment, right? We weren't really playing for stakes. Silence fell again. But this time it felt different. Heavier. Someone in the crowd spoke up. You said $3,000. We all heard it. Harris turned, smile still plastered on his face but his eyes hard. Figure of speech. Hypothetical. This was about community engagement, not. You made a bet, another voice said. A woman this time. In front of everyone. The news camera was still recording. The red light glowed like an accusation. Harris's PR manager appeared at his elbow, whispering urgently. Harris nodded, then turned back to the crowd. Look, I think there's been a misunderstanding about the nature of. Pay him. The voice came from the back. Then another. You lost. Pay him. Harris's face flushed. His hands curled into fists at his sides, then relaxed with visible effort. The rules weren't clear, he said, voice tight. 3 moves doesn't constitute a full game. Any chess expert would tell you that. We'd need to play it out too. The position is won. The older man with glasses stepped forward. I've been playing chess for 4 decades. That position is completely winning. The boy dismantled you. Harris's smile finally died. He looked at Nico, and for just a second, something ugly flashed across his face. Not anger. Smaller than that. Meaner. Embarrassment. A security guard materialized next to Nico's chair. Time to clear the area, son. Events moving to the next segment. Nico didn't move. He looked at Harris, waiting for something. An acknowledgement. An apology. The money he'd been promised. Harris turned away. Wait, Denise pushed past the velvet rope. You said $3,000. My son won. You said. The PR manager intercepted her smoothly. Ma'am, I'm sure we can discuss this privately. If you'd like to leave your contact information. He promised. Denise's voice cracked. Not from weakness. From fury barely contained. He made a promise in front of all these people. Harris was already walking away, back toward the stage, toward the microphone, toward the next photo opportunity. He didn't look back. The security guard touched Nico's shoulder. Come on, kid. Let's go. Nico stood slowly. He looked down at the board one last time, at the position that had proven what his grandfather always knew. That he could see what others missed. That he belonged at any table he chose to sit at. Then he looked at the people watching. Some looked away, uncomfortable. Others met his eyes with something that might have been sympathy or might have been relief that it wasn't them. He reached into his pocket and gripped the wooden king so hard it hurt. Denise took his hand, and together they walked back through the crowd, past the velvet ropes, past the banners about community and building futures together. Behind them, Harris Brooks took the microphone and smiled for the cameras. And someone in the crowd kept recording. When someone breaks a promise right in front of you, when they look you in the eye and take back their word like it never mattered, something fundamental shifts. It's not just disappointment. It's the moment you learn that some people's integrity has a price, and that price is their reputation. If you've ever had someone powerful make you a deal and then walk away when it no longer served them, you know the specific kind of anger that follows. It's not hot. It's cold. It calculates. And it doesn't forget. What happened next in Westfield didn't start with outrage. It started with one person who refused to let the moment disappear. Nico and Denise walked 6 blocks in silence. The cold bit at their faces, but neither of them noticed. Denise's hand gripped Nico's so tightly her knuckles went white. Nico stared straight ahead, his face blank, but his breathing had changed, shallow, quick, the way it got when too much was happening inside him and he couldn't process it fast enough. When they finally reached a bench outside the public library, Denise sat down hard, like her legs had given out. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry, baby. Nico didn't respond. He was rocking slightly, a subtle forward and back motion that most people wouldn't notice but that Denise recognized immediately. He was shutting down. Retreating inward to somewhere the world couldn't touch him. She wanted to scream. She wanted to march back to that plaza and make Harris Brooks look her son in the eye and explain how a grown man could humiliate a child for entertainment. She wanted to demand the money he'd promised, the money they desperately needed, the money that had dangled in front of them like hope before being snatched away. But she didn't. Because Nico needed her here, present, calm. She put her arm around him and pulled him close. You were brilliant, she said softly. Your grandfather would have been so proud. Nico's rocking slowed. He pulled the wooden king from his pocket and held it in both palms, staring at it like it held answers. He lied, Nico said finally. His voice was flat, distant. He said $3,000. Everyone heard him. But he lied. I know. Promises are supposed to matter. Denise closed her eyes. They are. Then why don't they? She had no answer for that. Not one that would satisfy him. Not one that would make the world make sense again. They sat there for 20 minutes while the sun dipped lower and the temperature dropped. Finally, Nico's breathing evened out. The rocking stopped. He tucked the wooden king back into his pocket and looked at his mother. Can we go home? He asked. She nodded. What they didn't know, what nobody knew yet, was that someone had captured everything. Not just the chess game. Not just the 3 moves that had stunned the crowd. But everything after. The broken promise. The security guard ushering them away. Denise's cracking voice asking why promises didn't matter. Harris Brooks walking away without looking back. The person who recorded it was named Marcus Chen, a 23-year-old freelance videographer who'd been hired to capture content for Brooks Innovations' social media. He'd been instructed to get feel-good moments and community engagement. What he got instead was a masterclass in corporate cruelty. Marcus sat in his car in the parking garage, watching the footage back on his camera. He'd filmed hundreds of corporate events. They were all the same, manufactured sincerity, carefully staged generosity, moments designed to trend for 48 hours before disappearing into the algorithm. But this was different. This was real. Raw. Wrong. He looked at the final shot, Nico walking away, small and quiet, while Harris Brooks smiled for photographers in the background. Marcus had a decision to make. He could deliver the edited highlights to Brooks Innovations, collect his paycheck, and move on to the next gig. That was the smart play. The safe play. Or he could do something that might cost him work but might actually matter. He opened his laptop. Pulled up his personal social media account. The one with 47,000 followers he'd built by covering local stories that bigger outlets ignored. He uploaded the raw footage, all of it, and typed a simple caption. He beat a millionaire in 3 moves. Then they refused to pay him. He stared at the post for 10 seconds. Then he hit share. By the time Nico and Denise got home, the video had been viewed 800 times. By the time they went to bed, it was at 50,000. By morning, the number would break 1 million. And Westfield, New Jersey would wake up to a question it couldn't ignore. What happens when the powerful break their promises and someone finally refuses to look away? Sunday morning arrived with notifications that wouldn't stop. Denise woke to her phone buzzing on the nightstand, texts from people she hadn't spoken to in years, voicemails from numbers she didn't recognize, friend requests from strangers. She grabbed the phone, confused, still half asleep. Then she saw it. The video. Nico's face. Harris Brooks walking away. Her own voice, cracked and desperate. He made a promise in front of all these people. 1.2 million views. Her hands started shaking. The comments section had become a wildfire. Thousands of people, most of them furious, some of them sharing their own stories of broken promises and powerful people who faced no consequences. This is exactly what's wrong with corporate America. That kid is a genius and they humiliated him. I'm a parent of an autistic son. This broke my heart. Someone find out who this CEO is. He needs to be held accountable. They already had. Harris Brooks' name was everywhere. His company's social media pages were flooded. 1-star reviews appeared on every platform. People were tagging news outlets, demanding coverage. Denise walked to Nico's room. He was already awake, sitting on his bed with the wooden king in his hands, staring at nothing. "Baby," she said softly. People saw what happened. A lot of people. He looked up at her. Does that change anything? She didn't know how to answer that. By noon, the video had been shared by 3 major news outlets. A retired chess grandmaster named Victor Alvarez watched it in his home in Brooklyn and immediately posted his own response, a breakdown of the 3 moves, explaining in detail why what Nico had done was extraordinary. This wasn't luck, Alvarez wrote. This was preparation, pattern recognition, and tactical brilliance. In 3 moves, this young man demonstrated understanding that takes most players years to develop. And then he was robbed. Not of money, of dignity. The post went viral on its own. Chess communities across the country began analyzing the position. Forums exploded with discussions. Players recreated the game on their own boards, marveling at the precision. One comment appeared again and again, in different words but the same sentiment: they underestimated him because of how he looked. Because of who they thought he was. And when he proved them wrong, they punished him for it. At Brooks Innovations headquarters, the phones didn't stop ringing. Investors wanted explanations. Partners demanded statements. Employees whispered in break rooms, some defending Harris, most staying silent because silence felt safer. The PR team assembled in an emergency meeting. They drafted responses, tested language, calculated damage control. "We need to get ahead of this," someone said. "Issue an apology," another suggested. "Offer the money plus extra. Make it a scholarship." But Harris sat at the head of the conference table, jaw tight, saying nothing. His phone kept lighting up, texts from his wife, his father, board members. He ignored them all. He'd built this company from the ground up. Taken it public. Made himself a fixture in the community. And now a 14-year-old kid with a chessboard had turned him into the villain in a story being shared millions of times. "Sir." His PR director was waiting for direction. Harris looked up. "No statement yet." "But." "I said no statement." The room fell silent. Harris stood and walked to the window, staring out at the Westfield skyline. Somewhere out there was the boy who'd beaten him. The boy he'd dismissed, humiliated, cheated. The boy the entire internet now saw as a hero. And for the first time in 20 years, Harris Brooks didn't know how to win. Back at their apartment, Denise made Nico lunch while reporters left voicemails asking for interviews. She deleted them all. But one message was different. It was from a lawyer named Patricia Okonkwo, who specialized in contract disputes and civil rights cases. Her voice was calm, professional, kind. "Ms. James, my name is Patricia Okonkwo. I saw what happened to your son. If you're interested, I'd like to offer my services pro bono." What Mr. Brooks did, making a public promise and then refusing to honor it, that has legal implications. But more than that, it has moral ones. Your son deserves better. Call me if you'd like to talk. Denise saved the message. She walked back to Nico's room. He was lying on his bed now, staring at the ceiling, the wooden king resting on his chest. "A lawyer called," Denise said. "She wants to help." Nico didn't move. "Will it make him keep his promise?" "I don't know. Maybe." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Grandfather used to say chess teaches you that actions have consequences. Even for kings." Denise sat on the edge of his bed. "Your grandfather was right." Outside, the video kept spreading. The count climbed past 2 million. News vans started parking near Brooks Innovations. Protesters began gathering with signs. "Keep your promises. Autistic kids deserve respect. 3 moves. 0 integrity." The reckoning had begun. And Harris Brooks, sitting alone in his office, finally understood something he'd spent his whole life avoiding. The world was watching, and this time, he couldn't just walk away. Harris Brooks didn't go home Sunday night. He stayed in his office on the 42nd floor, door locked, lights dimmed, staring at his computer screen as the nightmare continued to unfold. The video had been shared 4 million times now. Articles were being written. Think pieces about privilege and accountability. Comparisons to other CEOs who'd fallen from grace. His phone buzzed. His father. He didn't answer. It buzzed again. His wife. He silenced it. Then he made the mistake of reading the comments. Thousands of them. Most angry. Some cruel. But the ones that landed hardest were the simple ones, the ones that asked questions he couldn't dismiss. Why would you humiliate a child? What kind of man breaks a promise in front of cameras? You have everything. He has nothing. And you still couldn't let him win with dignity. Harris closed the laptop. The office felt enormous and suffocating at the same time. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed him the city light stretching toward the horizon, a view he'd paid a fortune for, a view that was supposed to remind him daily that he'd made it. But tonight, it just made him feel small. He stood and walked to the bookshelf where he kept the awards, the magazine covers, the framed photo of himself shaking hands with the governor. Next to them sat something he hadn't looked at in years, his college acceptance letter. Full scholarship. First person in his family to go to university. He'd been 17, standing in the kitchen of their row house in Paterson, holding that letter like it was made of gold. His mother had cried. His father had clapped him on the back so hard it hurt. You earned this, his father had said. Don't ever forget that. Harris had built his entire identity around that moment. Self-made. Bootstraps. Every opportunity earned, never given. But somewhere along the way, earning had turned into taking. Gratitude had calcified into entitlement. He'd forgotten what it felt like to be the kid who didn't belong, who had to prove himself in rooms where everyone assumed he'd fail. He'd become the person he used to hate. The realization didn't hit like thunder. It seeped in slowly, coldly, like water through a crack. He thought about Nico's face across the chessboard. The quiet focus. The worn jacket. The way he'd touched his pocket after winning, like he was thanking someone who wasn't there. Harris had seen a prop. A photo opportunity. A kid he could mentor for the cameras and forget the moment they stopped rolling. He hadn't seen a person. His phone lit up again. This time, a text from his daughter, Riley. She was 16, away at boarding school. Dad, everyone at school is talking about the video. Did you really do that? His chest tightened. He typed and deleted 3 responses before finally writing, it's complicated. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. No, it's not. You made a promise and broke it. That's not complicated. That's just wrong. The text hit harder than any article, any comment, any investor call. His own daughter was ashamed of him. Harris sat down heavily in his chair. For the first time in years, maybe decades, he let himself feel something he'd spent his entire adult life avoiding. Shame. Not the performative kind you expressed in PR statements. Not the calculated kind you weaponized for sympathy. Real shame. The kind that made you see yourself clearly and hate what you found. He opened his laptop again. Watched the video one more time. Watched himself smile and make promises. Watched Nico's brilliant moves. Watched himself retreat, deflect, abandon his word. Watched a child walk away with nothing while he returned to applause. The comments were right. He was the villain in this story. And for the first time, he couldn't pretend otherwise. Monday morning, Harris called an emergency board meeting. His executives expected damage control. Legal strategy. A plan to make this go away. Instead, Harris said something no one anticipated. I need to make this right. Not for the company. For me. The room went silent. His CFO leaned forward. Harris, with all due respect, a public apology right now looks like weakness. It admits liability. We should wait for this to blow over, Anne. It's not going to blow over. Harris's voice was steady, certain. And I don't want it to. What are you saying? Harris stood. He looked around the table at the people who'd helped him build this empire, who'd calculated every risk, who'd taught him how to win at any cost. I'm saying I was wrong. And I'm going to say that publicly. His PR director started to object, but Harris raised his hand. Schedule a press conference. Tomorrow. I'll handle the rest. He walked out of the boardroom, leaving 15 stunned executives in his wake. For the first time in his career, Harris Brooks wasn't trying to win. He was trying to be worthy of the word his father had taught him decades ago. Earned. Tuesday afternoon, the Brooks Innovations lobby was packed. Reporters from every major outlet in the tri-state area. Cameras on tripods. Microphones clustered on the podium like metal flowers. The energy was tense, anticipatory, everyone expecting a carefully worded non-apology, a legal defense, a PR masterclass in saying nothing. Harris had told his team not to prepare remarks. No teleprompter. No approved talking points. You're sure about this? His PR director had asked one last time. No, Harris admitted. But I'm doing it anyway. Now he stood backstage, listening to the murmur of voices beyond the curtain. His hands were shaking slightly. He'd spoken in front of thousands of people before. Pitched to investors. Delivered keynotes at conferences. But he'd never done this. He'd never stood in front of cameras and admitted he was wrong without a plan to spin it into something else. His phone buzzed. A text from his wife, "I love you. Do the right thing." He took a breath. Stepped through the curtain. The cameras flashed like lightning. Harris walked to the podium. The room quieted, waiting. He gripped the edges of the podium and just stood there. 5 seconds. 10. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. Then he spoke. I was wrong. No preamble. No context. Just the truth. 4 days ago, I made a public promise to a 14-year-old boy named Nico James. I told him that if he beat me at chess, I would give him $3,000. He beat me. Decisively. Brilliantly. In 3 moves that demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking most adults never develop. Harris paused. His voice was steady, but his hands gripped the podium tighter. And then I broke my promise. I dismissed the game as an exhibition. I let my pride and my embarrassment override my integrity. I walked away and told myself it didn't matter because the cameras would move on and people would forget. He looked directly into the lens of the nearest camera. But it did matter. It mattered to Nico. It mattered to his mother, who works 2 jobs to keep a roof over their heads. It mattered to every person who has ever been dismissed, underestimated, or cheated by someone with more power than character. A few reporters shifted. Some wrote furiously. Others just watched. I'm not here to make excuses. I'm here because I owe Nico an apology, and I owe it publicly because that's where I broke my word. Nico, if you're watching, his voice caught slightly. I'm sorry. You deserved better. You deserved the truth, the respect, and the $3,000 I promised. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. This is a check for $3,000. But money alone doesn't fix what I broke. So I'm also announcing the establishment of the Samuel James Scholarship Fund, named after Nico's grandfather, who taught him chess and integrity. The fund will provide full education scholarships to neurodivergent students across New Jersey who demonstrate exceptional talent in STEM fields. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Additionally, Brooks Innovations will be funding community chess and learning centers in underserved areas throughout the state. These centers will offer free programming with priority access for autistic children and other neurodivergent kids who are too often overlooked by traditional education systems. Harris set the envelope on the podium. I didn't lose to a child 4 days ago. I lost to someone who saw the board more clearly than I did. Someone who understood that preparation and discipline matter more than confidence. Someone who carried his grandfather's lessons with him and used them to expose my arrogance. He paused again, this time longer. A lot of people are calling this a PR disaster. They're right. But it's also the most important lesson I've learned in 20 years. Power without integrity is just cruelty wearing a suit. And promises matter. Especially when you make them to someone who has every reason not to trust you. Harris stepped back from the podium. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking to do better. And I'm starting today. The room erupted with questions, but Harris raised a hand. There's someone else who needs to be here. He gestured to the side entrance. The door opened. Nico walked in, hand in hand with his mother. He was wearing the same jacket from the video, the wooden king presumably still in his pocket. His eyes scanned the crowd, too many faces, too much noise, but he kept walking. Harris met them halfway. Not at the podium. Not in front of the cameras. Just in the space between. He knelt down, bringing himself to Nico's eye level. I'm sorry, he said quietly, meant only for Nico. You were brilliant, and I was cruel. Thank you for teaching me something I should have never forgotten. Nico looked at him for a long moment. Then he spoke, voice soft but clear. See the quiet part. Harris didn't fully understand, but he nodded anyway. Nico reached into his pocket and pulled out the wooden king. He held it up for a moment, then tucked it away again. My grandfather made this, Nico said. He told me everyone deserves a second move. Even kings. Harris felt something crack open in his chest. He handed Nico the envelope. This is yours. It was always yours. Denise put her hand on her son's shoulder. Her eyes were wet, but she was smiling. The cameras captured everything. But for once, the moment wasn't performed. It was real. Harris stood and addressed the crowd one final time. This is where I stop talking and start listening. Thank you. He walked off stage. No victory lap. No photo opportunities. Just the beginning of something harder than winning. Accountability. There are moments in life that force you to see yourself differently. Not the person you thought you were, or the person you wanted to be, but the person your choices have actually made you. Those moments are rare. Uncomfortable. Sometimes devastating. But they're also the only moments that create real change. If you've ever had to face a version of yourself you didn't recognize, if you've ever had to choose between protecting your image and doing what's right, then you know how hard this kind of transformation is. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that integrity still matters even when cameras aren't watching, then maybe it's worth remembering the next time you have the chance to keep a promise or break one. The choice is always ours. The consequences are always real. 6 months later, the first Samuel James Community Learning Center opened in Westfield. It wasn't fancy. No marble floors or glass facades. Just a renovated community center with chessboards, computers, quiet rooms for kids who needed space, and mentors who understood that brilliance doesn't always look the way people expect. Nico showed up on opening day. Not as a guest of honor. Not for photos. He just came because his mother asked if he wanted to see it, and he said yes. The main room had 20 chess tables. Kids of all ages sat hunched over boards, some playing fast, some moving slowly, all of them focused. A few looked like Nico, uncomfortable with eye contact, sensitive to noise, processing the world in ways that didn't fit neat categories. One boy, maybe 10 years old, sat alone at a board, setting up pieces and knocking them down, over and over. Frustrated. Overwhelmed. Nico walked over and sat across from him. The boy looked up, startled. Want to play? Nico asked quietly. The boy hesitated, then nodded. They played in silence. The boy wasn't very good yet, but Nico didn't rush him. Didn't correct every mistake. Just let the game unfold naturally, the way his grandfather had done for him. When the boy finally made a good move, a fork that threatened two pieces at once, Nico smiled. "See," he said softly. "You saw the quiet part." The boy's face lit up. Across the room, Denise stood with Patricia Okonkwo, the lawyer who'd helped them navigate everything after the video went viral. They watched Nico teaching, patient and present. "He's different now," Patricia observed. "No," Denise said. "He's just more himself." Harris Brooks arrived later, staying near the back, watching but not intruding. He funded these centers, but they weren't his. They belonged to the kids who needed them. He caught Denise's eye across the room. She nodded once. Not forgiveness, exactly. But acknowledgement. He'd kept his promise. And then he'd kept going. That night, Nico sat at their kitchen table, the same table where he'd studied positions alone months ago. But now the apartment was warmer. The heat worked. The rent was paid. His mother's shifts had been cut down to one job, reasonable hours. Life wasn't perfect. But it was possible. He pulled out the wooden king and set it on the table. Traced his thumb over the worn edges where his grandfather's hands had shaped the wood. "I kept seeing the quiet part," he whispered. "Just like you said." The king sat silent, steady, proof that love outlasts loss and that lessons passed down matter more than money ever could. Outside, Westfield carried on. Buses hissed. People hurried. The world kept spinning. But inside that apartment, inside that learning center, inside the hearts of everyone who'd watched a 14-year-old boy refuse to be small, something had shifted. Integrity had checkmated power. And the game was far from over. It was just beginning.